June 25, 1876. The Montana Territory is baking under a merciless, blinding sun. 210 men lie dead on a dusty ridge. Their bodies are completely mutilated, stripped naked, punctured with arrows, crushed by war clubs, decapitated. A scene of absolute, primal carnage. But look closer. One corpse remains remarkably untouched. The most famous man on the battlefield, General George Armstrong Custer. He wasn't scalped. He wasn't butchered. Why? For a century, history textbooks fed you a comforting lie. They told you the Native Americans respected his bravery. They lied. Native American oral histories reveal a much darker, much colder truth. They didn't spare his body out of respect. They spared it because they thought he was too stupid to be considered a true warrior. His tactical decisions were so mind-bogglingly idiotic. They believed his soul was tainted by madness. Welcome back to Psyche of Power. Today, we are not conducting a military review. We are performing a psychological autopsy. We are going to dissect the brain of the most arrogant man in American history to understand a terrifying phenomenon. A phenomenon that probably dictates your life right now without you even knowing it. The illusion of control. How does a man who has everything actively choose to walk into an absolute slaughterhouse? Because Custer didn't die of arrows. He died of dopamine. He died of a lethal overdose of his own unexamined success. To understand the slaughter at Little Bighorn, you must first understand the intoxicating, poisonous architecture of absolute arrogance. Let's win the clock back. Meet the boy general. During the American Civil War, Custer was a rock star. He wore custom-made velvet uniforms. He sprayed himself with cinnamon oil. He was flamboyant, reckless, and absurdly lucky. At 23, he became the youngest general in the Union Army. Time and time again, he led suicidal cavalry charges against Confederate lines. Logic dictated he should have been blown to pieces 50 times over. But chance, pure blind statistical luck, favored him. He won. And this is where the psychological rot began to take root in his brain. In 1975, Harvard psychologist Ellen Langer coined a term that perfectly diagnoses Custer: the illusion of control. It is the human tendency to overestimate our ability to control events that are demonstrably dictated by pure chance. Langer proved this with a famous lottery experiment. If you hand a person a random lottery ticket, they will sell it back to you for roughly $2. But if you let them choose their own numbers, they demand nearly $9 to sell it back. Why? Because the act of making a choice tricks the primitive primate brain into believing it possesses power over the outcome. Custer survived the Civil War purely through the chaos of probability, but his brain processed it differently. He didn't think he was lucky. He thought he was chosen. He believed his sheer willpower was bending reality to his favor. He confused surviving a gamble with possessing a divine skill. This is the first ingredient in the cocktail of self-destruction, the delusion of agency. Fast forward to 1876. The U.S. government wants to force the Lakota Sioux and Cheyenne onto reservations. Custer is sent to do the dirty work. Before leaving, his superiors offer him a massive tactical advantage, a battery of Gatling guns, each capable of firing 350 rounds a minute. Custer refuses them. He claims they will slow down his march. He also refuses reinforcements from the Taunt cavalry. He takes only his 7th Cavalry, around 600 men. Why would a commander refuse absolute, overwhelming firepower? Because of the psychological anchor of his past. Custer's brand, his entire identity, was built on doing more with less. If he won with Gatling guns, the machine gets the glory. If he wins with a vastly outnumbered cavalry charge, Custer becomes an immortal god. Ego overrides survival. He is actively designing his own doom, mistaking his reckless choices for tactical genius. The illusion of control dictates that the more constraints you voluntarily place on yourself, the more you believe you command the universe. By June 24th, Custer's Crow and Arikara scouts warn him. They have found the trail of the Native American village. They tell him it is massive, bigger than anything they have ever seen. They warn him that the grass has been eaten to the roots by thousands of ponies. Custer simply dismisses them. This brings us to the second psychological trap, a concept researched heavily by behavioral economist Michael Barr, Eli in 2007. It is known as the action bias, and it is deadly. Barr, Eli studied elite soccer goalkeepers during penalty kicks. Statistically, the goalkeeper's best chance of stopping the ball is to stand completely still in the center of the goal, but they almost never do. They dive wildly to the left or right 94% of the time. Why? Because in a high-stakes situation, looking active feels better than being effective. The pain of failing while doing something is psychologically easier to endure than the pain of failing while doing nothing. We are hardwired to value kinetic motion over static patience. Custer learns his position might have been spotted by hostile scouts. The logical military doctrine dictates that he should wait, fall back. Wait for General Terry's infantry. Wait for the heavy artillery. Create a defensive perimeter. But Custer is a psychological goalkeeper. He cannot stand in the center. The anxiety of inaction, the fear that his prey might escape, violently overrides his training. He chooses the action bias. He orders his exhausted men to attack immediately. It is the middle of the day. His men have marched through the night. They are exhausted. Their horses are dying of thirst, and they are about to charge into the largest gathering of Native American warriors in the history of the North American continent. There are over 10,000 Native Americans in that valley. Nearly 3,000 of them are battle-hardened, heavily armed warriors. Custer has roughly 600 tired soldiers. The math is not just bad, it is suicidal. And here is your first cognitive reversal. You were taught that Custer died because he was ambushed by an overwhelmingly superior force. False. Custer wasn't ambushed. He was the aggressor. He died because his past successes built a mental architecture that made the concept of failure invisible to him. Act 2. The architect of his own demise. We have established that Custer is operating under the illusion of control and the action bias. But now, we introduce a pathological condition that turns a bad situation into an absolute catastrophe. In 2009, British neurologist and former Foreign Secretary Lord David Owen, along with psychiatrist Jonathan Davidson, published a groundbreaking paper. They identified a specific, acquired personality disorder that afflicts those who hold immense power without accountability. They called it Hubris Syndrome. This is not just a character flaw. It is a literal change in the brain's chemistry. Prolonged exposure to unquestioned authority causes dopamine saturation, which actively degrades the prefrontal cortex ability to assess risk. Symptoms of hubris syndrome include a messianic manner, a blatant contempt for advice, a loss of contact with reality, and the absolute conviction that your personal vision is infallible. By the morning of June 25th, Custer is a terminal patient of hubris syndrome. As he approaches the massive village, he makes a decision so strategically incomprehensible that military historians still argue about it today. He divides his already vastly outnumbered force of 600 men into 3 separate battalions. He sends Captain Benteen to the southwest to hunt for stragglers. He orders Major Reno to charge directly into the southern end of the massive village, and Custer takes the remaining 210 men to flank the village from the north. Why divide an inferior force in the face of a vastly superior enemy? Because in Custer's dopamine-soaked brain, he isn't fighting a war. He is managing a stampede. He genuinely believes the moment the Native Americans see his blue coats, they will panic and scatter. Major Reno charges into the valley. He expects the village to run. Instead, he hits a brick wall of pure, concentrated rage. Thousands of Lakota and Cheyenne warriors, led by men defending their families, swarm him like angry hornets. Reno's assault collapses instantly. His men are slaughtered in the brush. They drop their weapons, abandon their dead, and flee in absolute terror back across the river, scrambling up the bluffs to desperately dig holes in the dirt for survival. Meanwhile, Custer is riding along the high ridges to the north. He cannot see Reno's destruction. He is completely isolated. He has roughly 210 men with him, and he is about to realize that his fundamental assumption about human nature is entirely wrong. Custer assumed the Native Americans were primitive, chaotic savages who would break under the pressure of civilized military tactics. But the Lakota and Cheyenne are not running. They are being guided by the spiritual leadership of Sitting Bull. And they are being tactically commanded by a military genius named Crazy Horse. Crazy Horse doesn't fight with primal chaos. He fights with calculated, lethal efficiency. He identifies Custer's isolated position on the ridge. He sees the arrogance, and he exploits it. Crazy Horse orchestrates a massive pincer movement, while hundreds of warriors pin Custer down from the front. Firing Henry repeating rifles from behind the ravines, Crazy Horse leads a massive flanking maneuver around the ridges to entirely encircle Custer's rear. Suddenly, Custer's forward momentum stops. The dust clears. And for the first time in his exceptionally lucky life, the dopamine recedes. The adrenaline hits. He looks around. He is surrounded by 3,000 warriors. He has no Gatling guns. His reinforcements are miles away, pinned down. His men are exhausted. The illusion of control shatters violently against the cold, hard rocks of reality. And here is your second cognitive reversal. We assume the Native Americans won through sheer primal, chaotic savagery. False. Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse operated with supreme tactical rationality, discipline, and strategic patience. It was the civilized, formerly trained General Custer, who operated purely on primal ego, wild gambling, and emotional impulse. The perceived savages were the cold tacticians. The civilized general was the savage, irrational gambler. Act 3. The Pathology of Power. The final hour of George Armstrong Custer is not a battle. It is an execution. It is the physical manifestation of a psychological collapse. The 210 men of the 7th Cavalry are trapped on a dusty hill. Panic sets in. They are ordered to shoot their own horses to create grotesque, bloody barricades. They hide behind the warm, dead flesh of their animals, desperately firing their single-shot Springfield rifles. But their rifles begin to jam. The copper cartridges expand in the overheating breeches. Men are reduced to prying the jammed bullets out with knives, weeping in terror as a hail of arrows rains down upon them in a parabolic arc. The Native American warriors don't even need to expose themselves. They simply shoot their arrows high into the air, letting gravity pull them down into the tight cluster of terrified soldiers. It is a meat grinder. What is happening in Custer's brain in these final minutes? Psychological studies on acute trauma suggest a state of depersonalization. The brain, unable to process the absolute failure of its own God complex, simply detaches from reality. He didn't die bravely fighting to the last man. According to Native American accounts, the command structure completely disintegrated. It was sheer panic. Men threw down their weapons and ran aimlessly, only to be ridden down and crushed. It took less than an hour. 210 men, wiped out to the last soul. Not a single survivor left to tell the tale. The complete annihilation of an arrogant man's legacy, paid for with the blood of the men who followed him. The dust settles. The guns fall silent. The warriors walk among the dead. And this brings us back to our opening scene, the mutilation of the bodies. The mutilation wasn't random savagery. In their spiritual belief system, what you took with you in death dictated your form in the afterlife. They pierced the eardrums of the dead soldiers so they would listen better to the gods in the next life. But when they found Custer, they paused. They recognized the man who had brought this absolute disaster upon his own people. A commander so blinded by his own hubris that he marched his men into an obvious trap. To scalp a man was to take his power. To mutilate him was to curse his warrior spirit. But to leave him entirely untouched, that was the ultimate insult. It meant he had no power worth taking. It meant his spirit was pitiable. Custer's ghost haunts every boardroom, every political office, and every personal ego today. His destruction is the ultimate cautionary tale of hubris syndrome and the action bias. We all want to believe we are the architects of our own destiny. When we succeed, we attribute it to our own genius. When we fail, we blame external circumstances. This is the fundamental error of the human ego. Custer confused luck with destiny. He confused the act of making a choice with the ability to control the outcome. And when the variables of reality finally overwhelmed the variables of his luck, the debt was paid in blood. Think about the Gatling guns he left behind. Think about the advice of the scouts he ignored. Think about the basic math of 600 against 3,000 that he blatantly refused to calculate. Arrogance is not just an annoying personality trait. It is an active cognitive blindfold. It physically prevents the brain from processing contrary data. It turns intelligent men into absolute fools. History tried to immortalize him as a tragic hero. Painters depicted him standing tall, fighting to the bitter end. But psychology demands a harsher, truer verdict. Custer was not a victim of circumstance. He was a gambling addict who finally ran out of chips. His currency was human lives, and his addiction was his own mythical status. The Battle of Little Bighorn is a masterpiece of tactical brilliance, executed by men fighting for their very existence. But it is also a psychological tragedy, authored by a man who believed he was literally untouchable. What is your little bighorn? Where in your life are you mistaking a lucky streak for absolute competence? Where are you forcing action just because the anxiety of standing still is too terrifying to bear? The illusion of control tells you that you are holding the reins of the universe. But the universe does not care about your ego. It operates on brutal math, probability, and ruthless consequences. The greatest threat to a successful person isn't failure. Failure teaches. Failure recalibrates. Failure humbles. The greatest threat to a successful person is unexamined success. It is the victory that convinces you that the rules of gravity no longer apply to your specific existence. George Armstrong Custer rode into the valley of the Little Bighorn believing he was a god among men. He left it as an untouched corpse, pitied by the very people he sought to conquer. He is forever trapped in history, a monument to the fatal pathology of power, a stark reminder that when the human ego goes to war with reality, reality always wins. It doesn't negotiate. It simply slaughters. So, the next time you feel that surge of absolute certainty, the next time you feel the dopamine telling you that you cannot fail, the next time you decide to charge blindly into the valley without looking at the odds, pause, step back, ask yourself, am I operating on logic? Or am I suffering from the illusion of control? Am I making a choice? Or is my ego making a choice for me? Because the line between a visionary genius and a cautionary tale is often just one unquestioned, arrogant decision. The brain is a powerful engine, but without the brakes of humility, it will drive you directly off a cliff. The graves at Little Bighorn are quiet now. 210 markers dot the hillside. Each one represents a man who died not for his country, but to feed the insatiable black hole of one man's narcissism. Custer's final stand wasn't a battle. It was the universe violently balancing the equation. It was the catastrophic collision of a false narrative with an objective truth. We study history not to memorize dates, but to map the labyrinth of human nature. The villains and heroes of the past are just amplified versions of the psychological demons that live inside all of us. You have the power to recognize the action bias. You have the power to dismantle the illusion of control. You have the power to inoculate yourself against Hubris Syndrome. But it requires a ruthless commitment to reality. It requires the courage to look at your own successes and admit how much of it was just pure blind luck. This is the essence of psychological power. Not the ability to dominate others, but the ability to ruthlessly govern your own mind, to refuse the intoxicating poison of arrogance. Because out there, in the valley, reality is always waiting. and it does not care about your past victories. It only cares about the absolute truth of the present moment. General Custer learned this lesson in the final moments of his life, surrounded by dust, blood, and the terrifying collapse of his own godhood. You don't have to pay that price. You can choose to learn it right now. Govern your ego before it governs you. Don't let your dopamine dig your grave. This is Psyche of Power, deconstructing the minds that shaped history so you can control your own. Hit subscribe if you value cold, hard truth over comforting myths, and as always, stay rational.